We're here to take on the most complex stories, cut through all the noise, and really get to the heart of a mystery.
And today we are diving into a crime that, even decades later, is still one of the UK's most high-profile and, frankly, agonizing unsolved cases: the murder of Jill Dando.
To really get the scene, you have to remember who Jill Dando was in 1999. She was often called TV's Diana.
She was an absolutely beloved face on British television. She hosted everything from holiday shows to the big national crime appeal program Crime Watch.
And the setting for her murder is just so jarring. This wasn't some dark alleyway crime.
No, not at all. It was broad daylight in Fulham, a very affluent part of London, right on her own doorstep. She was ambushed, shot once in the head.
At point-blank range, the reports say the muzzle of the gun was literally pressed against her left temple.
Which just screams execution. It's cold, it's professional, but it's also shockingly intimate.
So the police investigation, Operation Oxborough, kicks off immediately. It's huge. But the lead detective, DCI Hamish Campbell, he runs into a fundamental problem right away.
He does. A structural contradiction. He basically had two theories that just couldn't both be true.
Either it's a disorganized, obsessed stalker,
Or it's a ruthless, highly trained, professional hitman. And those two profiles are worlds apart.
and that tension just defined the whole inquiry, didn't it? They were dealing with, what, over 7,000 lines of inquiry?
It was a massive undertaking. They were looking at everyone from, a local eccentric to organized crime bosses who might have been angry about Crime Watch.
All the way up to potentially an international political assassination.
Exactly. So our mission today is to follow the evidence down both of those tracks. We're going to look at the forensics of the weapon, the key suspects, and really unpack how a debate over one tiny microscopic particle led to, well, a complete failure of the legal system.
Okay, so let's start with that physical evidence. Because when investigators looked at what was left at the scene, they found this paradox. You have expert skill mixed with what seems like shocking amateurism.
That's the perfect way to put it. Let's start with the ammunition, because the ballistics were immediately a sign of a really specialized operation.
What did they find?
They recovered a Remington .3A0 casing, but the bullet itself was actually a 9mm round.
So that's not standard. You can't just buy that.
Not at all. This was a custom-built, low-powered composite round. It was meticulously put together for a very specific reason.
And what was that reason? I mean, why go to all that trouble, all that risk to build your own ammunition?
It was about stealth. The experts who examined it found that propellant gunpowder had actually been removed from the round.
To make it quieter.
Precisely. It's a sound suppression technique. It reduces the muzzle blast and stops the bullet from creating that loud supersonic crack. It's an old trick, actually.
I read it was associated with the NKVD, the old Soviet security forces.
That's right. It's a technique used when you don't have a silencer, but you need to maximize stealth. So whoever did this, they understood enough about explosive physics to engineer a quiet shot.
That's a very high level of knowledge. But the gun they used to fire this clever bullet was, by all accounts, terrible.
It's another part of the contradiction. The sources all point to it being a reactivated or re-engineered pistol. Maybe something like a starting pistol converted to fire a real bullet.
Which would be incredibly unreliable, prone to jamming, even dangerous to the person firing it.
It's a choice that makes absolutely no sense for a professional hitman. They prize reliability above everything else.
And yet, despite this shoddy weapon,
The shot itself was described by a ballistics expert as technically near perfect.
so a perfect shot with a terrible gun using custom-made quiet ammunition, the contradictions just keep piling up.
They do, and it gets even stranger when you look at the execution style itself. The killer pressed the gun right against her head.
Why is that so unusual for a professional?
It's all about the forensic risk. When you fire a weapon in direct contact with someone, you get massive blowback. The killer would have been sprayed with tiny particles of biological material, firearms residue.
So a trained assassin would keep their distance.
Always. You create separation to avoid leaving that kind of evidence. This intimate, high-risk method feels much more like a chaotic, passionate crime than a cold, calculated hit.
But again, if it's a crime of passion, why the custom ammo? It's like we have a killer who acts like an amateur but has the resources of a pro.
That is the absolute core of the mystery. And then he was gone. Witnesses saw a man hurrying away, but police couldn't find a getaway car nearby.
Which at first suggested he was local, right? That he just walked away.
Initially, yes. But later on, traffic cameras actually picked up a blue Range Rover speeding away about 22 minutes after the murder. It was never traced.
So that points back towards organization. a getaway driver.
It does. And there was another detail. Some witnesses saw a man near the scene, this figure they call Man X, and he was carrying what looked like a really big old mobile phone.
And that detail is important, isn't it? Because it adds this international layer.
It does, because one theory was that it wasn't a phone at all. It could have been a covert handgun, disguised as a phone, a type of weapon known to come from the former Yugoslavia.
And that leads us straight into the Serbian revenge theory, the one the media just completely ran with.
It was the cleanest motive, in a way. Just 48 hours before Jill was killed, NATO forces had bombed a Serbian TV station in Belgrade, killing 16 staff.
And Jill Dando, just days before that, had hosted a big BBC appeal for Kosovan Albanian refugees.
So, in the mindset of a Serbian nationalist, she could have been seen as a very powerful, symbolic target for revenge.
And there was a call to the BBC right after, wasn't there?
Within hours, someone called, claiming the murder was retaliation for the NATO bombing, and these stories kept surfacing. In 2001, there were reports of a man in a bar in Belgrade basically taking a bow for the killing.
And this isn't just old news. The theory is still very much alive. I saw reports that cold case officers are now looking at a specific person.
That's right. Milorad Ulemek, a notorious Serbian paramilitary soldier. His nickname is Legica.
He's already in prison for other assassinations, isn't he?
He is, serving 40 years. But two key eyewitnesses, plus facial comparison experts, now believe that Ulemek is Man X, the man seen near the crime scene. They apparently matched a unique striped tie he was seen wearing.
So that investigation is ongoing. But back in 1999, the police looked at other theories too.
Oh, yes. Revenge from organized crime figures she might have exposed on Crime Watch. And then there was a much darker theory.
The pedophile ring.
The idea that she was killed because she'd found out about a ring involving big names at the BBC and was about to expose it.
But none of those professional hitman theories, Serbian or otherwise, produced a viable suspect in the UK.
They hit dead end after dead end. They just couldn't find the assassin. And so they were forced to go back to the crime scene, back to that high-risk, intimate, close contact shot.
And that led them down the other path, away from the hitman and towards the local loner.
Exactly. The psychology of the crime itself forced them to change direction.
So if the hitman theory wasn't working, that psychological profile, the messy, high-risk style, it must have seemed like a perfect fit for someone else. Did that lead them to bury George?
It did. 10 months after the murder, they arrested Barry George. He was a local man who lived less than a mile away.
And when you look at his profile, you can see why the public was so skeptical. He had a low IQ, epilepsy, a diagnosed personality disorder.
And you contrast that with the custom-built weapon and that near-perfect shot, and you can understand why people immediately thought he was just a convenient scapegoat.
Like the case the police built against him, it was based on this incredible collection of circumstantial evidence, just layer upon layer of what seemed like damning coincidences.
His history was a huge red flag for them. He was a known stalker, convictions for sexual assault, attempted rape, a fantasist.
The classic Walter Mitty character, right?
Yeah.
You pretended to be a police officer, a soldier.
All sorts of things. And that profile was compelling to the investigators because it fit with the high-risk nature of the killing.
How so?
The forensic psychologist on the case concluded that the risks taken, the outdoor shooting, no clear getaway, were proof the killer was a classic loner with a severe personality disorder. That was Barry George, to a T.
And he was placed at the scene.
Very much so. Seen in the street 4 hours before the murder, and then seen nearby in an agitated state just after it happened. He also lied to police, said he didn't even know who Jill Dando was.
But the things they found in his flat? That's what really sealed it, wasn't it?
It was devastating for his case. Undeveloped film with photos of women from TV, copies of the BBC's magazine, notes about a researcher on Crime Watch.
She was obsessed with her world.
Deeply. And then there was the gun.
The photograph.
A photo of Barry George posing with a pistol of the exact same type used in the murder. One of those unreliable, re-engineered guns. For the prosecution, it was a mountain of evidence pointing in one direction.
So we're left with these two completely opposing stories. The professional Serbian hitman with custom ammo, or the local obsessed loner who just happens to have the right kind of gun.
And the entire weight of that initial conviction, the thing that tipped the scales, rested on one single minuscule piece of forensic evidence.
The single particle.
Exactly. Deep inside the pocket of a coat George was wearing, they found one particle of firearms discharge residue, FDR.
And critically, its chemical makeup matched the residue found in Jill Dando's hair and on her clothes.
That was the smoking gun. It was the only direct physical link between Barry George and the shooting. For that first jury, that particle connected the man to the murder. It sealed his fate.
But years later, while he's in prison, that evidence just falls apart. How did this crucial piece of evidence suddenly become unreliable?
It was a huge shift in how forensic science was understood. On his appeal in 2007, the Forensic Science Service, the FSS, basically reviewed their own work.
And what did they find?
They took this extremely cautious new approach. They said because finding a single particle like that is so rare, the probability of finding it was basically the same whether George fired the gun or not.
Wait, hold on. The evidence was dismissed because it was too rare. That sounds completely backwards.
It sounds illogical, doesn't it? But that's what happened. They concluded the evidence was neutral, that it shouldn't have been used to sway the jury. And based on that, the appeal court quashed his conviction. Barry George walked free in 2008.
So without that one particle, the whole circumstantial case, as strong as it seemed, just wasn't enough anymore.
Exactly. Which brings us to the statistical argument that came later, which is essential to understanding this whole mess.
Because statisticians looked at the FSS's reasoning and said it was fundamentally flawed.
They did. They said the FSS was asking the wrong question. The FSS was asking, did this particle come from that gun? But the statisticians argued the real question should have been about probability.
The activity level, not the source level.
Right, they should have asked. Given that this incredibly rare particle was found in his pocket, what is the probability that Barry George handled the gun?
And when you frame it that way, the numbers change completely.
Dramatically. When statisticians applied the correct models, like Bayes' theorem, they found the particle wasn't neutral at all. Some models suggested the probability that George had handled a gun, given the particle was found, shot up to as high as 71%.
So the argument wasn't that the particle proved he was guilty.
No, but that it should have been presented as evidence that increased the likelihood of guilt, instead of being dismissed as meaningless.
It's just a terrifying thought, isn't it? That a murder conviction can stand and then fall because of a debate over the correct way to calculate the probability of a microscopic speck of dust.
It shows just how fragile forensic justice can be. And the end result is that Barry George was acquitted, but he was never exonerated. He was denied compensation twice.
And the High Court actually concluded there was indeed a case upon which a reasonable jury properly directed could have convicted him.
Which leaves the case in this legal limbo. It is officially unsolved. Barry George is free, and the police are now back to looking seriously at the professional hitman theory and this Serbian paramilitary soldier.
It is the ultimate cold case, a riddle just wrapped in its own contradictions.
And that really leaves us with this final thought. The engineering of the murder, the custom ammunition, that suggests a highly professional assassin, maybe someone tied to an international conflict.
Yet the method, that intimate high-risk execution, and that mountain of circumstantial evidence, it all points so strongly to a local, disorganized loner like Barry George.
And the one piece of hard forensic evidence that could have bridged that gap, that single particle, was thrown out because of a statistical debate over rarity and probability.
So if the courts couldn't even agree on what one particle meant, how can we ever resolve the case? What does the story of Jill Dando's murder teach us about that tension between overwhelming circumstance and the need for absolute physical proof? And you have to wonder, where else might a similar statistical flaw be hiding, preventing justice in another high-profile mystery?